The Consulting Success podcast is powered by the Clarity Coaching Program. If you'd like to work directly with the Consulting Success team and receive personal coaching and support to optimize and grow your consulting business, marketing, and revenue, visit consultingsuccess.com to find out more and apply.
Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business.
Hey everyone, it's Michael Zapersky, and welcome back to another episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Jenny Millar joining us. Jenny, welcome.
Thank you so much.
So Jenny, you are the founder of Untapped Pricing, where you help clients boost their pricing and their revenue. You previously worked at eBay, where you were responsible for pricing from what I believe around across maybe 11 or so different European markets. You've been a mentor to students at the Warwick Business School, where you've been lecturing on pricing strategy, as well as at the London School of Economics. I'm excited to have you on to talk about pricing. I were chatting before that we've had at least one, if not a couple episodes over the years where we kind of go into pricing. But when I got introduced to you, I was really just interested to hear your perspective, not only around pricing, because that is your area of expertise. And that is such a key for so many consultants, regardless of whether they're earlier stage or, they're building a larger firm, but also you built your business up to 12 or so team members. And so I think people can also learn from your journey about how you've done that. And specifically, you've gone through now to this place where you left living in London and you're in kind of the countryside in England. And so how you built a really remote business and kind of workforce, I think will also be interesting. So with all that being said, let's go back in time a little bit. You were working at eBay, but I'm wondering, what was the impetus for you to actually go out and become a consultant and build a consulting business? Where did that kind of idea get hatched?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Interesting to hear a plotted history from your perspective.
Hopefully it's accurate. And if it's not, feel free to correct.
No, it's very accurate. So yeah, I was in a corporate world, global matrix, wonderful organization at eBay for about 10 years. I started off in big data analytics, and I guess my first foray into pricing was in that context. So their pricing analytics team for the European business. And then it moved into more strategic roles around pricing. And by pricing for eBay, I'm talking about setting the fees for selling on the European eBay platforms. And it just opened my eyes to how powerful this lever was. And we used pricing very strategically to optimize performance, but also to nudge customer behaviors. And so that's where my interest in the psychology of pricing and the role it plays in a customer's decision-making and behaviors really was born.
I'm curious, when you talk about the function of pricing, I think for some people, they may not even be familiar with what is the function of pricing inside of an organization. And typically it's going to be a larger organization if they actually have a function specifically for pricing. You mentioned that one of the things you were doing inside of eBay was helping to set the prices, right, that would kind of impact or affect customer behavior or user behavior. Could you just go a little bit kind of into a bit more detail around what did that look like? And maybe an example of, here's something that we did with pricing, here was the impact that it had on the business or on customers or users.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're right. It's only at a certain size that organizations have pricing teams. And actually now I'm really focused with Untapped Pricing on businesses that are not at that point yet. So they're scaling, but we'll get to that in a moment. So example of eBay pricing, we would be charging small listing fees to list an item on the platform and then a commission fee for selling that item. Things are a bit more sophisticated for business sellers, where we might charge differently depending on the category and offer subscription packages for certain kind of tools and services. But we used to toggle pricing to help fix bottlenecks or challenges with the platform, as well as just drive performance. So an example would be managing inventory quality. So a marketplace like eBay, you don't want the site to be flooded with really poor quality inventory as everyone's just listing God knows what. So you use that sort of very, very small but present listing fee as a price barrier, even though tiny, to, I guess, a gatekeep on a certain level of quality
Because it shows a level of commitment. If somebody's willing to actually take out their credit card or whatever they're paying and do that, that's going to instantly separate those that if it was free, they would just put up anything. But actually having to pay, even if it's a very small amount, does separate or show kind of the intent of a buyer as opposed to somebody who's not.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. All right. So you did that for how long? Were you working in eBay?
10 years in the end.
10 years. Okay. And then fast forward us to the point where you started thinking, okay, maybe I should make a change. And then how did you go from that idea in your mind to actually starting your own kind of consulting business around pricing?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the trigger was quite a common one. So I had very young children and a busy, hectic London life. My partner and I both had kind of big corporate jobs and the equation didn't work anymore. Actually relocated to another part of the UK and I took the leap and started freelancing. And it was actually very unstructured at the time and quite organic. I had to change my own mindset when it came to networking and putting myself out there. Even before eBay, in my time in sort of banking, I had always done very internal roles. So my network outside of those companies was almost non-existent. And I think I felt really uncomfortable with this idea of networking because it felt very forced and very, fake somehow.
And did you start all that once you had already left eBay?
Yes.
Okay. So there was no kind of planning in advance or steps to build. So you essentially decide, okay, I'm going to relocate. We're moving the family. And now I need to start. And did you know at that time that you wanted to, when you said freelance, was the idea to freelance and essentially offer your expertise, advice, or do work specifically around pricing, or were you not yet clear on that at the beginning?
Not yet clear. And it was a leap of faith as I think something had to lead with something. So the relocation was the first marker in the sand. And then we sort of started to solve other things around that. And so the freelancing was very wide open. It was very exploratory. I started getting comfortable, kind of reaching out to people, having coffees. And actually, I managed to turn my relationship with this networking that I was so fearful of on its head just through doing it, and realized that actually it's about having interesting conversations with interesting people and being open to what might come about directly or indirectly as a result. So that came, I will hands up and say it was all very unstructured at the time.
So 2 questions for you on that. And then the first one I'll plant the seed and we can then come back to it in a moment. I'm wondering, did you have any kind of qualification process? Like, how did you allocate your time to decide who to spend time with for those meetings? So let's come back to that in a moment. But before that, I'm interested in, you said that you weren't yet focused on pricing at the start. What were you doing? Because, so you were in banking, you were in eBay. So over a decade of kind of experience. Initially, when you were offering your services or your expertise or thinking, well, I'm going to build a business around what I know, what were you putting yourself out as? And just kind of walk us through that, because I'm interested in the transformation, or I should say the transition from going broader to then becoming more specialized around pricing.
Yeah. So I think I started out proudly being a generalist and then quickly realized that that wasn't tight enough for people to really anchor on to how I could add value to their businesses. And so sometimes I would be helping with the things I knew best. So analytics or strategy, maybe a bit of pricing. But it quickly became clear that actually the area where people needed help the most, underserved, was pricing. And particularly because I'd stepped more into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So the size of organization I was with was much smaller. I'd started to teach at Warwick Business School. I started to get involved with various tech accelerator programs. So I was exposed to the struggles that scaling and emerging businesses were having with pricing and could start to see or explore how I could help.
And did the traction that you were getting around, let's say, teaching at Warwick or being part of accelerators, was that all framed around the idea or the focus of pricing at that point? Like, did you have that focus?
I started to focus there, and that's where the traction started to accelerate. I also then put the brand around it. So I was open to bringing others in, and also actually so I could charge more. So I wasn't selling Jenny Millar, I was selling untapped pricing. And then I quickly became the bottleneck in my own business.
Okay, so we're going to get there. We'll come back to that. A lot to cover here. So how long did it take you from the time that you left eBay and going out being more broad, data, analytics, pricing, strategy? How long was that period before you decided, or to the point where you decided that you're going to actually focus specifically on pricing strategy? How long was that?
About 18 months.
18 months. Okay.
Picking up whatever work I could in different guises, but starting to warm up my network.
And did you have kind of like an inkling that, and an idea that pricing, or like you need to have more focus? Did you put it off for a period of time, or did it really take 18 months? Like it just kind of hit you 18 months down the road? I'm wondering because oftentimes people fight this idea, like they know they need to specialize more, focus more, but they don't because they fear that they're losing on opportunities, or like they're actually closing the target instead of opening up. So what was your kind of experience there?
Articulated how I was feeling perfectly. I was proud to be a generalist, and I didn't want to close doors. I wanted to keep them wide open. Yeah. And it took me a little while to learn that.
Makes sense. Okay. So then let's come back to this idea of networking, which is something that I find so interesting from the perspective of back in the day. Like when I first started in my first business 20 something years ago, like networking was just such a key part of, you just do it. Like if you wanted to meet people and learn about stuff, you'd go to different events. And then it seems like as time has gone on, and especially around with COVID, things shut down, people have been holding off, I think, going and trying to meet people personally or going to events. That's starting to change now as things have opened back up. But one of the challenges or dangers that people have when they do networking is you end up spending a lot of time with people that essentially just want to kind of like sell their own things, and they're not the right people. They're not really people that can refer you to others, or they're not actual buyers. So what was your experience there, and how did you try to make sure that you were actually meeting with people that could either refer you business or could become actual clients?
Yeah. So I think I learned the hard way that it's very sensible to be selective about how and where you spend your time. And also to be really clear about what you want from each conversation, whether that's a corridor conversation at an event or you've set up an introductory call. And I think that's as important to kind of be clear on that yourself as it is to articulate it to the other person.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And so then from that networking, you got your first few clients, it sounds like.
Yes.
Fast forward then to today. So initially it was networking that brought in the leads. What today is working best for you and for Untapped Pricing, and from a lead generation kind of marketing perspective to fill the pipeline?
Yeah. So our network is still key, and regular LinkedIn content and email marketing is really key to staying on people's radar. So we're top of mind at the right time for them to think about pricing. We also get new clients or leads from referrals made by other consultants who are pointing people our way when their clients need expertise in pricing, and happy clients also introducing us to others or moving to new companies as well. And although it took a while to remember to ask for that.
Can you tell me about that? So when you say ask for that, to this point, like you've shared a bunch of things that you're doing or ways you're generating leads. LinkedIn, of course, so that requires you or your team to post content and like to be proactive in that way. But some of the things you mentioned, the majority of it sounds like people are kind of just coming to you or sending people to you. It's a little bit more kind of quote reactive. However, you just mentioned that it sounds like you are doing something proactive. There is some thought behind it. So I'm just interested to know a little bit more about what does that actually look like, because there's probably something in there that others could be doing in their businesses as well.
Yeah. So I think if you have really delighted clients, there's this inbuilt assumption, or certainly was with me, that they will go out and be your advocates and that they will connect the dots as they spot opportunities to refer people to you. But I don't think that is the case. I don't think that's the correct assumption, and have found that by just saying, hey, look, happy clients, we really rely on referrals, and great people like yourselves know great people who need our help. So please do join the dots and make those introductions. And they're like, oh, yes, of course. Like, I'm glad you said that. Let me think about person X, Y, and Z. And yeah, it's triggered activity by actually now asking at the end of a project.
And so, yeah, I'm going to hit on what I was going to ask you right there. It's like, so when do you do it? Is it right at the end of the project? Do you do it when it's a face-to-face or a Zoom call, or like just a little bit more detail around when have you found is most effective to actually implement that where it creates a positive result?
Yes. So at the end of a project, so we've wrapped up, we've reflected, and now kind of transitioning out of their business.
Mm-hmm.
Like that seems to be the right point. We're remote by design. So our operating model is remote. So it's always by Zoom. And I think like face to face, perhaps with a written reminder or prompt a couple of weeks later, perhaps is what works best.
Fantastic. Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit to pricing itself, because I think most people believe, and certainly this is what I've experienced with, many consultants over the years, that they know like inside that they could be charging more. And in some cases, they want to validate that and, whether that is actually true or not. And I'm wondering, in your experience, how can a company, in this case, if we kind of focus around the idea of maybe a solo consultant or a small consulting firm, what have you found is the best way for somebody to actually validate whether an increase in price is the right move?
Yeah, pricing, I think as consultants, ask ourselves that question. And I would encourage anyone in that situation to do two things. So the first is don't be afraid to experiment. So you are going to learn so much from experimenting with your pricing. Are there options at different price points you could be offering to sort of stretch people's thinking into other budgets and other areas? And the second is to try and remove that guesswork as much as possible. So be mindful of your own assumptions and speak to your customers. So what does your service mean to them? What is the value it is delivered? Whether that's kind of tangible and measurable outcomes, intangible outcomes, what has it benefited them? And then I think have you read the MOM test?
The MOM test?
The MOM test, yes.
I've heard of like the grandmother test, which is you have to make something so simple that your grandmother would understand, but I have not heard the MOM test. So
Okay, so similar premise, Rob Fitzpatrick. It's a great book. And it's all about the asking questions in a way that even your mum can't lie to you. And so we find this is a really great little toolkit, if you like, for asking questions around value and price. Have those conversations with customers, with prospects, so you can compare the difference between those who have experienced your service and those aren't in your universe yet, and really listen out for the language they're using to describe what you do and how they're evaluating their return on investment.
Right. So just to summarize what I'm hearing, it sounds like number one, be open to experimenting and recognize that, like, is it true in your experience that the only way to really know whether, like, to truly validate if increasing your fees to whatever level you're increasing them makes sense or is the right move, is that essentially you have to actually increase your fees and you have to put them into a proposal, offer them and get a yes or a no, right? And get some feedback on that. Is that the only way to truly know, or have you found that there's some way that people can potentially validate that without actually going out for a lucrative proposal and with a higher fee in it?
Yeah, so I think the validation piece can come first. So understand value through the eyes of your customers and prospects. So have those detailed conversations and let that inform your experimentation practices. So I think it's probably that way round is most powerful. But also your services are going to mean different things to different audiences. So it's okay to charge differently in your consulting practice, depending on who the audience is, and use what you learn from those customer conversations to hone your questioning, your lines of questioning in the scoping process to better predict where there is headroom on price potentially. So you're starting to shift from kind of day rates and time and materials type mindset on pricing and moving towards that value-based pricing by spotting those opportunities.
Yeah. One thing that we've kind of worked with and suggested to many clients when it comes to pricing, and they're looking to increase their prices, is just like leveraging options, right? So if you have kind of a range or different options, it gives an opportunity for a client to essentially to choose which direction they want to go, as opposed to just having a hard, like, one number. And then within that range, I've always found that you have a bit more wiggle room to experiment. Have you found the same thing? And is there any kind of thoughts or best practices related to that you share with your clients?
Yeah, definitely. So I completely agree with you. Offering choices at different price points is so empowering. You're shifting from that binary mindset of shall we buy this or not to which shall we buy. You can use some lovely price anchoring techniques. So your gold option is priced considerably higher than the others. Some will go for it because they want all those bells and whistles, but even if they don't, it plays that anchoring role in the perception of your other price points. But also, I think laying those kind of choices out can really position you as the expert. So you are guiding their decisions more clearly, and that's often appreciated, particularly if you're offering services that they've never bought before, or it's kind of talent that they don't understand, they don't quite know what they need. So I think choices and different price points not only lays out for them how scope and price change, but also lets you do that signposting and kind of guidance that is so much appreciated.
Yeah, totally.
Hey, it's Michael here, and we'll be right back to the podcast. But first, are you ready to grow, scale, and take your consulting business and marketing to the next level? If so, our Clarity Coaching program may be a great fit for you. You'll work with our experienced team to set up a strategic plan for your business and coach you step by step in areas like how to consistently attract more leads, develop a magnetic message that resonates with your ideal clients, strategically package and position your services, earn higher fees, win more proposals, and scale your business. To find out more about Clarity Coaching and apply, go to consultingsuccess.com and click on coaching.
When you work with clients, you've seen a lot of different situations when it comes to pricing. What are some of the most common kind of mistakes, or are there almost like pricing sins that people just make over and over again, and you have to go in and you just like, oh yeah, here we go again? Is there anything that kind of stands out to you that even in sophisticated and established organizations that have been maybe in business for a decade or more, so it's not like they're just getting started, but mistakes that you see people making over and over again?
Oh, tons.
Yeah, if you could share me
Yeah. First couple that spring to mind so firstly, like discounting for no reason, kind of state your price clearly and confidently. Don't fill the space with unnecessary discounting. Like, lets your prospect react. Don't just sort of devalue it immediately. I think connecting to the two topics together, offering choices at different price points can really put you on the front foot with any negotiation that might follow, because you've already laid out how scope and price change. So sort of get that quid pro quo if you are pushed for a discount. And then also, if there are like inconsistency in pricing by members of your sales force. So even in a small consultancy practice, there might be 3 or 4 consultants all pricing projects slightly differently. And actually, by aligning as a group on and codifying what works well and what your kind of guidelines as a group are, and laying out those so that there's still the ability to flex based on the opportunity at hand, but everyone's clear on those guardrails and principles for their pricing, I think is often a very easy thing to do, but overlooked or neglected.
Yeah, I think those are great ideas. I want to come back to pricing a little bit more, and as we kind of start talking a little bit more about untapped pricing and the business that you've built, because today, as we mentioned earlier, you're at about 12 or so team members. You are a fully remote company. I'd love to just kind of hear your journey of start off as the Jenny Show, but it sounds like you were also clear quite early on, correct me if I'm wrong here, but quite early on, that you wanted to build this bigger than just being a solo consultant, you doing all the work. So maybe to start off, I'd like to hear kind of the progression of the hires that you made and how you built the team. But before we do that, just share a little bit about the thinking that you had and why you knew early on that you wanted to build this bigger than just being you.
Yes. So I guess the first trigger was being the bottleneck in the business. It was frustrating. It became, I ran out of capacity and wanted to continue growing the business.
Jane, sorry to interrupt, but when you say capacity, I'd love to kind of get like the details around that. So do you mean that you had more demand than you could handle, or you didn't have enough time in the day, or like what was actually going on? So you kind of paint that picture so that others that might be experiencing that themselves, or maybe even they're getting towards that, they can kind of see some of those signs before it's happening.
Yeah. So it was a case of more demands than I could fulfill by myself, but also being very conscious that I'm not good at everything because no one is. So let's start to take this to the next level and start making more than the sum of the parts as a team.
Right.
So those 12 consultants now, we have a mix of expertise. So some are pricing strategists, pricing analytics experts, behavioral psychologists, design thinkers, research specialists, because we're often conducting the research that will generate the evidence that's going to directly inform our clients' pricing decisions.
And who was the first hire that you made? What was the role?
Yeah, first hire was design thinker. So design thinking has become a really central part of the magic in our approach. And we bring colour and energy to the topic of pricing and want to make it so accessible. I always found that pricing doesn't have a great reputation. Like, I think people often perceive it to be quite a dry numerical topic, but actually it's all about human beings, both on the sort of price setting side and on the kind of purchasing and customer side.
Can you actually talk about that a little bit more? Because I know that you have these kind of two keywords that I've seen in your work, which is kind of behavior and nudges. And that's stuff that I think people might talk a little bit about when it comes to pricing, but more often it seems like that's related to persuasion or something else on that side is where I've kind of seen those more. So I'd love to hear, what does behavior and nudges in your world have to do with pricing, and how do you actually benefit from that?
Yeah. Okay. So as on the customer side, we think a lot about how and when a customer sees pricing information in their journey with an organization.
Right.
So we might be looking at small tactics in the way that price is positioned. It might be, so the font size used, for example, for the number, the price itself has a direct impact on the perceived magnitude of the price itself.
Okay.
So brains have this universal conceptualization of size. So if we see a big number, as in written in a big font, we think it's larger than when it's written in a small font, for example. There's a first tip for your readers: just knock down that font size when they're writing the price point. Also, things like this, there's so much research on this topic. It's fascinating. When a price point is written in red, it is perceived to already be on sale or a really good price, particularly by men.
What about women or others out there? Yeah.
Yes, to a lesser degree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Red is still a good color, because I remember my time building business in Japan and living in Asia that you don't write somebody's name in red. Like, that's considered in many places not a good thing, but it sounds like, so pricing is okay.
Pricing is okay. Yeah.
Okay. Got you. All right. Any other tips like that? I mean, I think that these are great tips for people. Anything else that stands out as like, yeah, this is key when you think about pricing?
Think about, charm pricing is an example people have seen everywhere. So ending your price points in nines. So up to when your prices are still in the tens or the hundreds, it can be a very effective technique, but it only works in certain cases. So if your price is, let's say, $130 and you bring that down to $129, it's not going to make much of a difference. But if it's that $90 and we make it $89, that will have an impact because the left-hand digit has reduced by 1.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
We read from left to right in Western society. So even if we're not reading out loud, we're anchored by that first number, that first digit of the price that we see. And that is why charm pricing can be so effective.
So to take that one step further, let's just say that in a proposal, we had an option for $249,000 or euros or pounds or whatever. And then if we wanted to have a lower price, doing it at even like 209,000 wouldn't have as big of an impact as going to, let's say, 197, because you're changing that first digit to something lower.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I like the distinction there. Okay. So anything else? I do want to talk a little bit more about, just to understand kind of the hiring process that you've gone to build a company. But I think what you're sharing right now is going to be very valuable for people. So I don't want to cut off too quickly around the behavior, the nudges. Is there anything else that you think is just really important for people to know when it comes to pricing and this idea of behavior, nudges, design thinking, and so forth?
Yeah. So I don't want to ignore the other side of the business, if you like, which is the client's decision making. So pricing is one of those topics that is often like the hot potato. And in scaling organizations, so let's say anything up to 100 million in turnover, you don't have a pricing team yet, typically. And often it floats around the C-suite because no one is sort of accountable for pricing, yet everyone's got a very strong opinion. And they should do, because pricing is so central and it affects strategy, product, marketing, sales. It's inextricably linked. But these different members of a leadership team will have different needles they want to drive, and hence the strong opinions. So we have to go in there and facilitate that team's alignment and buy into a new pricing approach. And of course, removing that guesswork with evidence-led and customer-centered thinking. And so that's where design thinking really comes into its own again.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, this topic is such a big one. I know we've experienced that when you raise prices, for example, for a program, if you have like an enrollment or sales team, in many cases at the first kind of couple of weeks of that new higher price point can actually be challenging for salespeople, because they have to shift their mindset to be able to feel confident that they can actually sell at that higher price point. And the moment that they do, they're back to where they were before in terms of their ability to sell but just like that initial confidence around it. So you're right. I mean, pricing is so core and it's such a hot topic, highly debated topic with many. But yeah, I just find it's such an amazing point of leverage. I say to consultants all the time that if you're an established consultant, probably the easiest way for you to make more money is through pricing. You don't have to do more. You don't have to deliver more. You don't have to spend more time if you know how to communicate value, if you know how to identify value, right? And if you could be strategic with your pricing. So I think the work that you're doing with your clients is truly just so powerful. So let's come back, because again, you built this company. Your first hire was somebody around design thinking. Just kind of walk us through who are the next few hires. And I'm just wondering also, as you made these hires, like, why did you make them? So like, why did you go and hire a design thinking person as opposed to a virtual assistant, or as opposed to somebody else? Kind of walk us through that at a high level.
Yeah. So I think the sequence of bringing people into the organization has been based on where the biggest glaring need was at the time, or gap to plug. And there are now key roles that are central to every pricing project that we do. So we need pricing expertise, we need design thinker, we need typically a qualitative researcher and a quantitative specialist as well. So almost they're the core roles. So they are the key hires, if you like. And then we have a network of freelancers who are kind of academics in nudge theory, for example, through to kind of analytics resource and other expertise that we don't always need, but we keep them sort of in close orbit. And often these individuals are portfolioists. So they love having a combination of different things. And I think that really benefits us, because they then bring those ideas into the projects they're doing for Untapped. And yeah, as I mentioned before, it's sort of making more than the sum of the parts on a project basis.
And was it always easy for you to make those hires, or were you fighting at times wondering, should I do this? Should I wait? I need to maybe build this next level before I bring on this new person. What was that like for you in terms of just the mindset and the comfort level around kind of hiring and building people, or building the team with more people?
Yeah. So I guess one way that has really helped with that sort of confidence and fit piece has been bringing on freelancers who evolve into permanent members of staff. So then sort of the chemistry is there, the rapport is there, they're loving what we're doing, we're loving what they're doing. And actually it's just an evolution of that relationship, but it's sort of de-risked for both parties from the outset.
Is that what you do with most of the people that are on staff today?
Yeah, exactly.
Love it. Okay. As you've been building the business to this point, what's one mistake, or I typically call them learning experiences, right? Because they're not mistakes necessarily, but what's maybe one area that you've struggled with or had a challenge around? And it could be inside of the business, or it could be the impact of the business has then maybe kind of bled over into the personal, but just anything that you're willing and able to share around the challenge that you've kind of had as you've been building the business.
Yeah, great question. I think one that is hot on my mind today, so we're going to go with that one.
Let's do it.
Is handling naysayers on a client team. So as I mentioned before, pricing's the hot topic and lots of strong opinions, very senior folk who we've got restricted time with. And I find sort of some like naysayers can be extremely helpful because they're that voice of challenge that ends up meaning we get a better outcome for the whole sprint. But I think they can quickly sort of derail a process that everybody else is leaning into. And so I think I personally have learnt the hard way that it's best to work with those naysayers to understand where they're coming from and work through their approach sooner rather than later, so it doesn't derail it for everyone else.
Right. And have you found then like what works best or is most effective is to try and speak to that person or people directly one-to-one to try and understand their situation? But let's say that they continue to just be a naysayer. They have a perspective or an opinion that you just don't really feel is going to be productive or beneficial for the company, for the ultimate client. What do you do in that situation? Do you go to the client, the decision maker, and say, this person is an issue, or how do you handle that?
Yeah. So I think making sure we keep very close to how everybody's doing. So we know quickly whether the naysayer is representative of the group or not, or whether it's sort of isolated view. So that's important. And then to promptly pull them aside, like if the project sponsor can be there too, that can be useful, but don't want to be trying to go over their heads. But just, understanding why they're challenging us so hard. Like, what is that pushback rooted in? What are they concerned about? Sort of trying to build their trust and sort of buy into the process. But then I think if it continues to be disruptive, it is about kind of working with the project sponsor, and it's a kind of lean in or step aside because this is derailing it for everyone else.
Yeah. All right. So 2 quick questions here before we wrap up. And the first one is, as you've now been building the team, you have a dozen or so people, you're taking on more clients. There's management now involved. There's leadership involved, right? It's not only doing the work anymore. It's all these other aspects about actually running a 7-figure business and so forth. What has been most important for you, or I should say maybe helpful for you in achieving balance? Because I think very often it's easy, especially as you're building a business and now you have a lot more people. There's just a lot more going on, from finance to marketing to sales to the core values and just all that stuff. How do you make sure, or what have you found is most helpful for you, especially because you have family and kids and so forth, to try and maintain that balance while you're still building the business?
By asking myself one question, which is, am I the only one who can do this? So about any sort of task or thing that's going to take a chunk of my time, I've had to think about the evolution of my role in the business. So how should I be spending my time to benefit everybody? And is that lined up in the right way? And so that question of like, am I the right person to do this, or am I the only one who can do this? The answer should be yes, like 90% of the time, I think.
Yeah.
That's been a good just sort of sense check for me, because you're right, it balloons. It's no use to anybody, like inside my business or outside of my business, if I'm keeling over because I've pushed it too hard.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's great advice. And then Jenny Millar, final question for you here today. I appreciate you coming on and sharing. I think we could go on for hours talking about this topic and everything else, but I want to respect your time. So where should people go to learn more about you, about untapped pricing, about everything you have going on? I think you also have a resource for people that's available around pricing that they might benefit from. So could you kind of share a little bit more about that?
Of course. Thanks. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. So I'm Jenny Millar with an A, so Millar. Our website is untappedpricing.com. And the tool you're referring to, so we have recently developed thepricingscorecard.com. And this is a free online tool. It's won various awards recently. It gives business leaders instant insight into the health of their current approach to pricing. So it can be used by kind of consultants through to medium to large organizations. And it's a great diagnostic tool, right? So if you want a first step, okay, where could I be improving? Take a look. Takes about 5 minutes to complete a series of yes/no questions, and you'll get a personalized report with lots of practical tips that you can use right away.
It's fantastic. We'll link all that up in the show notes at consultingsuccess.com. Jenny Millar, thank you again so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.